Hi guys, thanks for joining in again, this time for a talk about emotional pain. Now, I know emotional pain is not a very pleasant topic to talk about, and it's certainly not a very pleasant experience to go through, oh no, yet this is exactly the reason why I want to talk about it with you. I want to give you insight into how emotional pain is processed by your body and your brain, and I want you to understand it better because it will help you cope with it more successfully. So, just before we jump right into the physiology and also look at coping strategies, I just want to make sure that you and I understand the same thing under emotional pain. So, what is it, emotional pain? I mean, I'm sure every one of you has experienced emotional pain before. You all know exactly what it feels like. It's this feeling of extreme sadness, feeling upset, perhaps even angry. You're extremely suffering inside you. It's really painful because obviously it's all also called emotional pain. And overall, it's very unpleasant, right? And a study has actually found that the pain we experience from losing something is twice as intense as the emotional experience of gaining something. Twice as intense. Think about it. This can explain to you why we sometimes tend to hold on to things, although it might not make the most sense that we're holding on to them. Sometimes those things are not even as beneficial to us as we believe, yet we don't want to let go. We'd rather hold on to them just to avoid this pain that comes from losing it. And let's look at the origin of emotional pain a bit closer so you can understand where it comes from. While with physical pain, we have an obvious physical trigger, emotional pain has more of a psychological origin. So, emotional pain means nothing else really than an extreme negative emotional experience. You know, you can feel sad or have a negative emotional experience on a daily basis, really. You can feel sad for a short while, but it wouldn't classify straight away as emotional pain. So, to classify as emotional pain, this negative emotion needs to be experienced very intensely. And just one last thing I want to make you aware of is that emotional pain cannot be produced by our body as such. So it always requires a trigger or source that lies outside of us. And this source is usually set in a social context. Think about the times you experienced emotional pain. Now, I know this might not be very pleasant, even just thinking about the times you went through emotional pain, and it might trigger some not quite so nice memories. But if you think about these times, you probably realize the worst times when you lost someone, when someone hurt you, when someone disappointed you, and you see that all of these examples are set in a social context in a way that they involve a person. Now, this doesn't apply all of the time, however, it does most of the time, and keeping in mind that emotional pain is so strongly linked to a social context is relevant when we want to detect the source of our emotional pain, and this will play a role later on in the coping strategies. But for now, let's move on to the physiology, the fun part really. So, before I walk you through the physiology of emotional pain, let's have a look at physical pain. Both are types of pain, really, and understanding one type can help you understand the other. And physical pain is a bit easier to understand, I suppose. So, with physical pain, we have this obvious damage done to our tissue, and then there are pain receptors located in our tissue that can pick up this damage. Now, these pain receptors produce a signal. This signal is sent to our spinal cord and then up to the brain. In the brain, there are several areas involved that process this physical pain, and one of these areas is the limbic system. Now, the limbic system you can basically just imagine as the emotional center in your brain. It's the birthplace of emotion, really, because whenever you go through an emotional experience, this center, this limbic system will always be activated. Now, that's quite interesting because even with physical pain, we have this emotional center in our brain activated. It does make sense because even physical pain comes with an emotional experience, but it also shows you already how closely this physical pain but also emotional pain are linked to each other. Now, there are other brain areas involved. I can't really mention all of them because it's a lot, but one important idea I want to make you aware of, or I want to tell you, is that there are brain areas involved that process physical pain, and these brain areas modulate the pain. So modulation means nothing else than the ability of our brain to change the intensity of pain experience. So we can either make the experience more intense or less intense. It's comparable to saying that people have different pain tolerances. Now, different pain tolerances can also be caused by different sensitivities of pain receptors, but it can also be due to this modulation process happening in the brain. So that's super interesting to know that pain is not a very objective experience, but rather subjective, even physical pain. And this notion of pain modulation is important for you to keep in mind because it also applies to emotional pain. Now, before I give you specific details how our brain really modulates this pain experience, let's start at the beginning and look at how emotional pain is processed from step one before we get to the modulation process. So while with physical pain, I said that we have these pain receptors that pick up damage and really produce the signal of pain. With emotional pain, we don't have such receptors. So how is emotional pain really picked up in the brain? To understand this, we will have to look at what emotions really are and where they come from. Now, emotions are no innate properties that are associated with a person, an object, or anything in this world. Emotions are just a personal appraisal coming from you. So every emotion is experienced individually and it depends on your personal appraisal, and this appraisal again depends on your memory, your beliefs, your motivations. So overall, emotions are no innate properties. They are originating in us or produced by us in response to a certain event or person, object, whatever in this world. And in the brain, as I told you before, this limbic system is really the birthplace of emotion. So this is always activated when we experience emotion. So when we go through emotional pain, it means that your personal appraisal of this event that caused you the pain must be extremely negative. And what happens in the brain is that your emotional center is heavily activated because you have such an intense experience, emotional experience. Now, beside this emotional center, we have other brain areas that are processing emotional pain as well. One of the areas is kind of a convergence zone, and there are two specific areas, one the anterior cingulate cortex and the other the anterior insula. Now, both of these areas are also connected to emotional experiences, especially emotional valuation. And emotional valuation basically means that you can evaluate emotions as either a positive or a negative emotion. So these two areas are kind of responsible for that, but also they represent a kind of convergence zone. Convergence zone basically means that a lot of different areas in the brain connect to this convergence zone and have kind of are bound together there as well. Now, quite interestingly, in this particular zone or in these two areas, we have a very close link between physical and emotional pain. Studies have shown that both these areas are activated during the experience of emotional and physical pain. Essentially, this means that both physical and emotional pain activate the same or directly neighboring areas in the brain, which shows you how very closely they are, not only from kind of a physiological point of view, but also from an experiential point of view. And one last area that I want to point out to you that's responsible for this modulation process I mentioned earlier is the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is basically the complete opposite to your emotional center, the limbic system. The prefrontal cortex is your center for rational thinking. It's your executive control in the brain. So it's the direct counterpart to your emotional center. So what happens when we go through emotional pain is that the emotional areas will be heavily activated. Now the thing is in the brain that brain areas can connect with each other. They can have a functional connectivity. And the functional connectivity is just a fancy term for saying that brain areas communicate with each other and they can influence each other. This functional connectivity also exists between your emotional and your rational center. So that means they can influence each other, and it's really a bidirectional influence. So in the event of emotional pain, when your emotional centers are heavily activated, they will influence your rational center in the way that they can disable your rational thinking and your control. You might notice from your own experience that when you go through extreme emotions, extreme emotional pain, that it's kind of hard for you to think straight and really to keep a cool head. So that's why, because there's this connectivity between emotional and rational center, and your emotional center, when it's heavily activated, can disable your rational center. However, this influence goes both ways, so it can also work the other way around. Your rational center can take back control over your emotions. It can make the activation in the emotional center less intense, and it really can get you back in control over yourself. And this is what we want to achieve. We want to gain back control, and we want to modulate our emotional pain experience to make the pain less intense. To cope with the pain, we want to make the emotional experience less intense. And this is what your rational center, the prefrontal cortex, can do. It can make the pain experience less intense by making the activation in your emotional centers also less extreme. Right, so this is a lot to imagine and process. I'm gonna give you specific ways how you can do this, how to get back in control, how to regulate your emotional experience, because for now this is all just the physiology, so it's just your biological basis that shows you that there is an ability, that your brain has an ability to control your emotions, to change your emotional experience, to make emotional pain less intense. It has this ability, but obviously you also need to know how you can do this in practice. Just before I walk you through that as well, there's one finding, one really cool idea or fact that I wanted to share with you as well. And it's regarding the experience of physical pain in times of emotional pain. So have you ever wondered how you can experience a pain in your chest or heart during times of emotional pain despite no actual damage being done to your brain, to your chest or heart? See, I was talking about the brain so much. We're not talking about the brain just now, we're talking about the chest and your heart and the pain inside there during times of emotional pain. Right. So the reason for this is that there is a body system located in your chest, in your heart, and this body system is responsible for regulating your heart rate and your breath. Now, this body system also responds to social context. This means when you're in a positive social context, which is just being in the company of someone you're close with, you're intimate with, you feel comfortable with, in this positive social context, this body system will respond in the way that it calms you down and makes you more relaxed, because it slows down your heart rate and makes your breath more steadily. Now, in the opposite event of a negative social context, which is likely the case when you go through emotional pain, in the opposite event, this body system will obviously respond in the opposite direction, meaning instead of calming you down, it will make you more upset. So it will fasten your heart rate and it will fasten your breath. And this explains why we experience or can experience pain in our chest despite no actual damage being done to it when we go through emotional pain. Right, and now lastly, I want to finish off with the coping strategies. So just talking about the system located in your chest that responds to both positive and negative social context, you can already kind of figure one major coping strategy. One major coping strategy for emotional pain is social support. So now that you know there's a body system responding to both negative but also positive social context, it means that when you go through emotional pain, which is a negative social context or bound to a negative social context, you should try to get yourself back into a positive social context because this can help you calm down already and make the pain less intense. So just get yourself in company of your kind of emergency contact, your friend or a family member, and just being in their company can already help you a lot to deal with the emotional pain because your body will calm down and be more relaxed just being in the company of someone you're close with. And a lot of studies have supported this coping strategies, have shown that social support is highly effective. So that's one of the first things you should always do, really. And then, of course, this idea of modulation. So the idea that our cognitive centers can gain back control over our emotional centers and make the pain less intense, change the intensity of pain experience. Now, how do we do this? There's 3 strategies I want to talk you through. And all of these strategies basically are linked to a cognitive, to an emotional reappraisal. So reappraising your emotion. Remember how I told you that emotions are no innate properties to begin with? They just stem from your personal appraisal. This means that you can also reappraise your emotion. You can change how you appraised a certain situation, event, person, and this means you change your emotional experience. And this reappraisal happens in your cognitive centers. This reappraisal is a cognitive process and it's happening in your cognitive center. That's how you activate your cognitive center more again and gain control over your emotional pain. So 3 strategies of reappraisal. First, you can change your focus of attention. Now, when you go through emotional pain, it's highly likely that you will have a very negatively biased focus of attention. Your attention will most likely be focused on the cause of your emotional pain, and it's hard for you to see something else outside of this negative experience that caused you the pain. Let's say, for example, you lost someone. It's very likely that in this moment your attention will be focused on the loss that occurred to you and you'll forget about all the things you still have, you can still gain, and that lie outside of this loss. So what you should try is to change your focus of attention and see the other things that are still around you. Kind of see the bigger picture and concentrate on a bit more positive things in your life as well. So getting away from this mere focus on this negative event and trying to see other things that lie outside it can help you make your pain experience less intense. Secondly, you can change your perspective, especially your perspective on emotional pain itself. Now, I know emotional pain is a very unpleasant experience to go through, and I can understand if you view emotional pain as something you'd rather avoid, as something negative, and as something you might even push away when it occurs to you. While I understand this, it's actually more counterproductive if you view emotional pain as something negative. The experience of the pain is something negative. Instead, try to see it as a rather normal part to life. Because I can promise you, every one of us go through times of emotional pain. Every one of us will face times of emotional pain. We will face it multiple times in life, actually. So it's really a normal part to life in a sense. So try to kind of adopt this perspective that emotional pain is a normal part of life, and ideally try to see the positive sides to emotional pain. This sounds super counterintuitive, I know. Is there even positive sides to emotional pain? I mean, yeah, it's kind of hard to see, I know, but you can see it as a learning experience. So, you can basically take the positive side in the way that you can learn something about yourself. When you go through emotional pain, you can learn how you react in those situations, what coping strategies help best for you, what works best for you, what you should do to get over this experience as quickly as possible, and just, yeah, learn about yourself, how you react, and what you should do for yourself to really deal with it in the best way. And learning all these things about yourself will help you cope with emotional pain the next time it's facing you, the next time you're going through emotional pain. And as I promised you, there will be a next time, so it's worth it. Really, yeah, seeing this learning experience, despite the negativity or however unpleasant emotional pain is, try to see some positive coming with it, and yeah, adopting a more normal or even a bit of a positive perspective on emotional pain can help you make the pain less intense as well. Right, and lastly, you can try to change the meaning of the event that caused you emotional pain. So, whatever the source for your emotional pain is, you kind of connect it with a certain meaning. You interpret it with a certain meaning. So, first of all, what you need to do is to detect the source of your emotional pain. Let's say, for example, you were rejected by your crush. This rejection of your crush will be the source for your emotional pain. And then there's a certain meaning you link to this cause, a certain interpretation. For example, it's quite likely that you think the rejection is because of you. You were rejected because there's something wrong with you. It's your fault, you made a mistake, you're an unlovable person in general. So you could, it's quite likely or quite common that people would interpret an event as a rejection as such. However, try to see that there's other possible interpretations as well. Try to see other meanings. For example, it could also just be that your crush is currently not available for a relationship in general. It's not you, it's basically them not being ready or available for a relationship, and it would be the same with anyone else. Um, so trying to see different interpretations, changing the meaning, can help you also make your pain less intense. So these are all strategies to reappraise your emotion, to get your cognitive center back in control in your brain, to kind of make the activation in your emotional centers less intense. Now, one last thing before I finish off and let you go, is one thing I really want to point out because it's a matter of my heart. So, when you go through emotional pain, as I said, your emotional centers will be highly activated and they can disrupt your cognitive centers. This leads to kind of unhealthy behaviors in a lot of cases. So, because you're in less control over yourself and your rational thinking is disabled, it's quite likely that you will ignore all your healthy habits that you usually keep. So you will ignore your healthy diet or your exercise routine, skip on sleep, maybe even turn to drugs such as more alcohol consume. And it also can be that you believe those kind of things represent a quick cure to your emotional pain. However, these things or unhealthy behaviors are also counterproductive in the long run for your successful coping. Now, for your brain to function optimally, your brain needs healthy behaviors. And these healthy behaviors include a good diet, enough exercise, enough sleep, and kind of a balanced alcohol or drug consume, so keep it in a healthy limit. And yeah, only when you try to kind of keep up with your healthy routines, you can also make your coping quicker and more successful, because you allow your brain to function better. And as you know now, your brain is really responsible, or the place where you modulate your pain experience and where you can take an influence on how much you experience the pain. Right. I hope you learned something. That was a lot to process. I know if you have any questions regarding certain points I talked about, I'll be happy to answer them. Yeah, if you have any feedback for me, also let me know. And on this note, I hope to see you again soon.